Hello and welcome! It's time to talk about another exciting episode of the Magnus Protocol. I almost said Magnus Archives again. Magnus Protocol episode 8, Running on Empty, which had a different title on the actual video than the title of the video. I know that's confusing. YouTube could really have done better there. Anyway, I assume we weren't supposed to see the other one just yet, and it will, we'll get there. No spoilers here for that, but, because they've probably fixed it by now, but we do have two quick things we need to go over. The first is, as I said last episode, full spoilers for Magnus Archives from now on. If you are at this point and you have not yet listened to the Magnus Archives, go back and listen to it. Please, because I'm going to be spoiling everything here. We've gotten to the point where we can't talk about what's happening in these episodes without talking about Magnus Archives. And the second one is, a lot of people pointed out how last episode I was focused on the congregation being the lonely. I hyper-focus very often on one aspect and have a hard time shaking myself from that. It's one of my many flaws. But I hyper-focused on what Diane Morgolis was going through instead of paying attention to more details about the congregation themselves. And yeah, it's a lot more likely they're the stranger than they are the lonely, right? Maybe an aspect of the stranger, but still a lot more likely. So, just when I'm wrong, as I often am, do not feel bad at all about calling me out on it in the comments and just being like, look, I understand why you thought this, but have you considered this? Because I'm probably wrong.
Welcome to the full spectrum. We have so much to share.
We start off here with a statement read out by Norris. And of course, let me give you the case number. I almost forgot. The case number is CAT2RB C3366-12023-280-220-220-24 Architecture Liminal Hunger coursework. And this is an assessment of Tara Stevens' coursework by Joseph Peterson. It is a paper submitted by Terrence about liminal spaces and specifically brutal liminalism, which causes architectural hunger. This idea that this man that was already going through a very stressful part of his life found himself alone in a service station, which is an actual place still today that you can go, and the restaurant that's talked about in it is still not active today. The elevators were in fact removed, just as we see in the story. I thought that was really cool. It's now called the Lancaster service station, but I thought that was very, very interesting. Yet again, just like an alternate timeline version of our world. Or is this one our world? Everything seems, there's a bunch of theories you could do there. There's a bunch of like things that have lined up and things that are very similar to our reality in the Magnus Protocol so far. Just something to think about as we move forward. Now, of course, what begins to happen here is really interesting, because we've mentioned a couple times that I have the theory that the fears have all fractured, right? That they're smaller and in smaller chunks than they were before. And that in many ways, maybe that's what the OIAR is doing, right? They're fracturing the fears even more by classifying them into these individual things. And then it seems like maybe, as people were talking about in the comments of the last video, the R part of the OIAR is going out and actually dealing with these, dealing with them, so maybe they are breaking them down until they're small enough they can be dealt with. And once they've cleaned up all these little avenues of it, who knows? We see Gwen talk about later how she is, going to be meeting some collaborators, as it were, some people that she's going to be working with. And so it very well could be that those are the people, right? The ones that go out and try to kill these, the hunters killing these that have been broken down into these smaller aspects. Now, it's also just as possible that the fears have actually like all fused into one, and it's just as possible that both are correct at the same time. They all fused into one, and now they're being broken up into these little pieces. But either way, this one was kind of hard to figure out at first. Now, obviously, once we get to the people later that are all the same, it feels a lot like little bit stranger in there, a little bit flesh in there. There's a little bit of theme of the dark in there with the void outside the windows, and maybe even the vast in some ways, right? But the mist really threw me. Maybe even the flesh, because they're biting, or the slaughter, because people get trapped up there. There are a lot of different ways I could see people taking this. My first thought when I saw that there was a woman in here in front of an elevator, was the spiral. But I'm feeling a little bit more strongly on a mix between the lonely and the flesh, or the lonely and the stranger. Just again, if they're all mixed in together and fused, then, different aspects. But if they're fractured, then it could be different tiers of them connected. That's all like fascinating. The story's great. It's really hard for me not to want to just talk about what happens afterwards. But specifically, the Panine Tower, it's not a panopticon, right? It's not a panopticon at all. But the shape is very reminiscent of a watchtower. And the fact that the windows all the way around, you could see the entire countryside, immediately had me going like, huh. That's an interesting thing to get brought up. And then, of course, we have the woman in the blue waistcoat with a gray skirt that is dressed like a stewardess. Immediately, I thought of the spiral, especially when it's mentioned how thin she is, but that could also just be because of the flesh, because they're eating people and there hasn't been anybody nearby. I know I'm jumping around everywhere. I'm sorry. We're in that point of time now where I don't have to worry about spoilers. So while we're talking about this story, I can just theorize while we go. And that's what the rest of these are going to be. But Terrence thinks at first it might be a time walk, something weird that happened there. There's a glowing mist, strips of light, and for a moment it feels like he's walked into a painting. A picture, not a painting, a picture. Painting's coming. Picture that his ex-wife took. There's something there. There's something important there. Some aspect I'm missing there of how that ties in. But from there, it's clear he's not in the same space he was in before. He gets transported somewhere, which is why at first I was thinking the spiral, right? Mist closing in, trying to drive him up. That also could be the lonely, as we saw with the cemetery, right? The mist was used very well there in Magnus Archives. But then from there, when he gets into the restaurant and everybody's faces are kind of the same, it's like the same faces over and over again, the same outfits, the voided windows. It really feels... I'm so torn, because it feels like the spiral, and it feels like the stranger, and it feels like the vast. But it also kind of feels like the flesh, because they wanted to eat him. And the lines of like... stay a while, and you are here. I know that I keep talking about it. I'm really firmly of the opinion that this is the Fears of Fractured, and this one is closer to the center of the fracture. I don't have a good like visual representation, but if you took like the sleeve and you said that the center was where all the fears were originally, right? And they fractured out from there. And so you have like all these different spider webs. The closer to the center you got, the more of the different fears would be affecting it, right? And that this feels like a bunch of the fears have power here. Because we have the eye with the tower, we have stranger with the people, we have the spiral with the lies, you are here, the elevator that makes no sense, we have the dark in the distance, we have the lonely in the fog, we have the vast in that the void just goes forever. We have the flesh in that they want to eat. It's a lot, right? And so I feel like this one is closer to like a centralized fear. Maybe a bunch of different people's fears have bled into this. I did not intend to talk about this that long. We have other things that I want to talk about. Eventually, he jumps out the window and he escapes. And there's a really interesting point here that's made, which is that nobody even noticed he was gone. And so it could be, well, yeah, maybe he just wasn't that likable of a guy. He just went through a divorce. He lost all his friends in the divorce. They sided with the ex-wife, it seems like. So maybe just nobody even really cared about him at this point. He hadn't made new friends or anything. But it seems like this tutor, really does care about coursework that's turned in and grades it very specifically. And I have a hard time buying that somebody that would grade it that judiciously would just miss that someone hadn't been turning in schoolwork. And I feel like there's a little bit of mention at the start of like it's late turned in, right? I feel like the tutor would have noticed. And so I think this is some kind of anomalous thing where when they got taken in there, nobody even knew. People forgot they existed. Kind of like what happens with the not them, with the stranger. So again, just like the vibes are everywhere is what I'm saying. And I'm sorry that this is not more focused, but we're about to get a little bit more focused because from there, when we leave Norris's statement, right, we get to Gwen and Alice arguing in the break room about how the kettle's not filled and it wasn't empty either. Haha. When Alice talks about Gwen's new job, the static kicks up. And it's also when we find out that Colin has been put on a mental health leave. Sam and Celia have left together, and we find out later it was her idea to do so, as they have gone to see GERRY. He sounds so happy here. I just want him to be okay. And so we knew going into this there could be alternate versions of people we knew, right? It's a different world. It's a different timeline. Maybe. And so, like, maybe there would be a bunch of different versions of people we already knew. This episode hard confirms there will be. It's not just a like, well, they could be out there somewhere. No, it hard confirms it. And we're going to get back to that in a minute. But GERRY is here. And Gertrude is his grandmother. I feel like that's a lie. I feel like that's not true, right? GERRY's acting very pleasant, very happy, very kind, much in the way that the ARG painted him as. But, and I know I still need to do my video on the ARG. It's coming. Trust me. I promise you it is coming. I found so much more information than I thought I would find there. And I will reference it from time to time until I get that video out. And then we'll reference it all the time. But it's in the ARG, it's mentioned that he's a very kind child, right? And so the fact that he is just that leads me to believe this could absolutely be another version of GERRY, right? But when it comes to Gertrude, one of two things is happening. Either this is still Gertrude somehow, or every version of Gertrude that will ever exist will always be Gertrude, right? There is no alternate version of Gertrude. She is just the same woman in every version. And I'm leaning heavily on that one because she is guarded. She is careful, but she still has that sense of humor. But she is so careful. You do not get anything past Gertrude, right? Sam and Celia have come to GERRY and Gertrude because they wanted to talk to GERRY since he also had been, studied by the Magnus Institute. But they don't really get the answers they wanted. It's clear Gertrude does not want him to talk about it at all. He very kindly talks about it as much as possible. Even gives up one of his paintings, Camden Epiphany. Feel like that's going to come back. I feel like all of this with GERRY might be an act. Anyway, obviously GERRY has been very helpful in the past. He's a good guy. But there's also like one little line here of GERRY saying, well, you asked for me. Which just hurts in the context of GERRY from TMA, where, he's trapped in the page and they have to ask for him. That line means something to me, and it hurt me deep in my soul. When Sam asks about the Institute, everybody goes quiet. Celia's quiet, GERRY's quiet, and Gertrude's quiet. GERRY doesn't give him anything really helpful, right? But he does mention that when the Institute was looking into him and asking him questions, one of the things they asked him was about what books he likes to read. Could mean the Leitners are still in this universe too. Jürgen Leitner could have made the same mistake, this universe's version, or they could have also made the transfer because they were so tied to the fears. So I feel like we're going to see mentions of the books again at times. Or it could be none of that happened at all, and they were just asking because of their experience with the Jürgen Leitner novels. The collection of Jürgen Leitner. Pipe murder. Anyway, afterwards, Celia asks Sam to help her with her mystery, and you can tell Sam does like Celia. Alice was not wrong. There's a moment where he's like, oh, and what kind of mystery would that be? Like it's about to be some kind of, pickup line or something. And then when she starts telling me, he goes, oh, Like, then he switches from, oh, this could be like a flirty thing to, oh no, I'm interested. What do you got going on here? What is this? As she reveals that Georgie's also here, and she's been on What the Ghost. We don't know that it's called What the Ghost in this universe, but I'm assuming that it will be. She wants to know about weird physics, time travel, teleportation, and other dimensions. Now, this could all be a red herring, but I am fully bought into the fact that I know exactly why she wants to know those things, and it's because this is the same Celia. There's also a little thing she mentions here where she says that because she knows that Freddy's search doesn't work that way. And it was pointed out in a comment on the previous episode. Let me get that comment. I don't want to try and act like it's mine when this one was a very specific one here. Yeah, this one was from Siren. And they pointed out that the search does work for Sam, at least, because he searched for Magnus and Protocol. So Celia doesn't know that it works yet, right? She has no idea. But Sam does, which means he can start searching for these things and maybe find some very interesting things. I assume Sam is going to assume that Celia meant that searching didn't bring anything up, when in actuality, she's just been told it doesn't work, whereas he knows it does. So there's some really interesting stuff that could happen there. I'm stoked to see. But the thing that I'm most stoked about from this episode, even though I love liminal spaces and I love the idea of brutal liminalism, tripped over that word, and the idea of architectural hunger. I love liminal spaces. They've been overdone to death on YouTube. But just like looking up liminal spaces, r/liminal spaces has an incredible amount of awesome pictures that shake something in my brain. I love liminal spaces. So this episode was really great. But despite all that, despite Jerry and Gertrude, the thing that has me most excited is that if these are alternate versions, a different dimension, alternate timeline, whatever, of these characters, we have strong reason to believe at this point that one of a few things has happened. Either Georgie and Celia traveled dimensions. Georgie and Celia are this universe's version, and they're having dreams or visions of what happened in the prime dimension, right? Of the original TMA dimension. Or all of the people that we know and care about from Magnus Archives have an alternate here in the Magnus Protocol, and they all were born around the same time, which means the timelines are way closer to what we thought. It seems like here Jerry might be a little bit younger than he was in TMA, but there's still like the chance of Celia, Georgie, Gertrude, and Jerry all being born in the same timeline, like in the same time span, and them being the only ones, nobody else, would be astronomical. In my mind, it's either all of them or none of them, right? Just Celia would have been one thing, but Jerry, Gertrude, Celia, and Georgie means this is 100%. They're all going to be here. And what excites me the most about that is people that were avatars in TMA should also be here and could also have a connection and could also just be members of the cast. We could get like Mike Crew or Judith or any of them just around, and that would be crazy to me. And the last big thing I wanted to touch on is that Jerry in the TMA universe was descended from Albrecht von Clausen, right? We know the von Clausens, a German family, had a lot to do with Jonah Magnus in Magnus Archives, could have a lot to do with Magnus Protocol, right? What if, I know that here Gertrude is Jerry's grandmother, but that might not be in direct, actually that's his grandmother. She could just be the person he's always looked to as a grandmother. What if he still is? And what if he's tied to the archives more than everybody thinks after the fire? There's so much that this episode had me nerding out about and trying to figure out. And I feel in some ways like I'm just gnawing at the edges of truth, and I'm just almost there to actually unlocking something really, really cool. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. And until next time, I've been Trey. This has been The Full Spectrum. Remember to always enjoy the full spectrum. The Magnus Protocol has to offer.
Welcome to the full spectrum.